everyone, this is Marc at Sound Theory Studio, and a familiar face here, I'm sure, if you've watched any of my videos, is my friend Sean.
Hello, hello.
And we're doing another practice amp review today, and if you've been watching any of the past videos, you'll be familiar with this one just because we've talked a lot about it, and that is... boom. The Peavey Vypyr. Now this comes in, I'm not an expert on these necessarily, but I can tell you that there's a few different models of this. There's like the Vypyr 1, the Vypyr 2, the Vypyr 3. The main differences are, I believe, size, and I think of the Vypyr 3, it's called the VIP 1, 2, and 3. So it's Vypyr, VIP 1, VIP 2, and VIP 3. If I remember right, the VIP 1 has a smaller speaker, so it's a much smaller amp. The VIP 2 is this one, so it's kind of like the middle of the road one. It has a 12-inch speaker. And then the Vypyr 3, VIP 3, the only difference I'm aware of is that the VIP 3 has like an LCD display and it's a little easier to program, but I think it also has a 12-inch speaker. Sean has played this a little bit. I let him just kind of jam on it a couple of weeks ago, but we haven't really given it a thorough test. Let me just really quickly kind of tell you the story about why I bought this and how I came across it. I wanted a practice amp for teaching at students' homes, so I wanted something that sounded really good, that was portable, that I could take, you know, out and about. So I went to Guitar Center, and it's just one of those things that happens where it's like kind of meant to be sort of thing. So I walk in, and I hear someone playing metal, and you know, like modern metal. And I was just like, wow, that sounds really cool. And it was the tone. I mean, he was a good player too, but the tone, it just sounded mean. And I was thinking, you know, I wonder what that is. So I walked over to where the sound was, and there's this kid sitting there playing. And I truly expected like a tube amp at least, and maybe even a 212 combo, maybe even a half stack,
or like a or a Mesa or something.
Right, yeah. Like I was expecting to see something pretty nice from what I was hearing, and it really blew me away to walk up on a Peavey practice amp that was solid state. My first Peavey was many years ago. I think it was called the Bandit.
Yep.
I wasn't, you know, I was just starting on guitar, so maybe I probably don't know what I'm talking about back in those days. But I was just. My opinion of it was as a little lukewarm. Like I thought it was okay. It was just
like what mid late 90s.
That would have been mid 90s. Yeah, mid 90s. It was okay. It was all right. This thing blows it away. So I sat down and talked with this kid for a minute, and you know, he was like, you know, if he was just telling me how much he wanted one, and I don't know if he couldn't afford it or what, but he was just telling me like, you know, this is the best practice amp ever, and all, you know, really singing the high praises. So I was like, well, I don't think I even need to look around anymore. I mean, I'd never heard a practice amp I liked that much. So anyway, bought it right then and there, brought it home, have not regretted it. So I'll tell you a couple more things about it. First of all, I already said it's a 12-inch speaker. Now, if you didn't watch the last review we did, it was of the Roland Cube, and it was $199 was the price. This is also $199, so this is like a direct comparison between two amps, two practice amps.
So what you can get for that.
Exactly. And what I was saying in that last review was I highly preferred this one for a few reasons, but the biggest being this one has a 12-inch speaker. The Roland Cube had a 8-inch. And I thought the difference in tone from the two different speaker sizes was pretty huge. And also I just think the tone of this anyway is better. You know, even if this were through an 8-inch speaker, I still think it'd sound better. There's a lot of options on this. One thing I can tell you right off the bat, and I guess this review is a little different than most because usually we wait till the end to tell you a lot about the amp, but I've played this for years and Sean has played it. One thing I don't like about it is it's kind of hard to see, but there's a lot of knobs on this thing. And it's very difficult to switch between all the effects and all the amp simulations. It emulates a lot of different Peavey amps.
So if you want something just to practice on, it could be kind of daunting with all the, you know, getting programs and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll give you
a certain sound you want to go for.
That's exactly it. So I'll give you. I mean, it took me a while to figure it out. Once I did, now it makes total sense. It's not a big deal. But if you're the kind of person that, especially if you're a beginner, it's definitely going to be really confusing to you how to work this thing. But I'll give you an example. So this knob right here has a list of amplifiers that it emulates. And it's easy enough, like, oh, here's a 6505, so you turn it up to that. But then, what's not as obvious is once you're at the 6505 emulator, now you have to push this like a button to switch between the channels of that amp. So you'd switch clean to heavy to lead.
So it's kind of like a clutch or something.
Right, yeah. And then, it has a series of effects here. And then the other thing that's strange is you have an EQ over here and like gain controls and all that. But you can press certain buttons here which will change what these knobs do so that you can change the amount of the effects. And so, I could talk about it for quite a while because it has a lot of options, but it is confusing. You do kind of have to read the manual. It's not the kind of thing where you just sit down and it just makes total sense to you. Right. I mean, it's complicated.
And these are Peavey specific, amp tones. So,
right.
I mean, if you don't know what a 6505 or, if you're not have that knowledge, I mean, you could be lost and just kind of compare it to you're going off your ear rather than the reference point.
And that was true for me too. I mean, I did know what the 6505 was. I didn't know what the Triple X was though, which is an option on here. I didn't know what the Buddha was, which is an option on here. So a lot of it was just kind of playing around. But I will say though, that I prefer something like that, I think, over what the Roland Cube had, because the Roland Cube just had distortions and super
maximum gain. Extreme or
right.
Right.
This is actually telling you this sounds like a 6505. This sounds like a Triple X. This sounds like a 6534. Right. So if you are familiar with those amps, that's really cool, I think.
I do like Peavey amps, so I do have some experience with like the Triple X. I think I've had that. The 6505s, they're great amps. So they do sound like those amps. They are emulating those tube amps. So I mean, it's not just a label and like we said, extreme or
right.
They do mean something.
It does mean something.
You really hear it.
I agree with that. And the other thing that's interesting is this, like when you put it at 6505. I mean, that's a half stack or a combo. The 6505 comes in, and both are tube.
Yeah.
So of course it doesn't sound exactly like it. But you can tell that it's trying to. And
emulated,
it's being emulated. So don't expect it to sound just like it, because it doesn't. But it sounds really close, and I think you'll be blown away. A couple other things that I'll throw out now that I'm not crazy about is the build construction. Here, I'll go ahead and let you take it. Well, first off, as you can tell, it's actually really light.
It is.
Really light. I mean, it looks huge. It's actually really light. Which is kind of a good thing in a way. But I think the problem is, like, it's hard to tell probably on the camera, but like this whole front panel where it says Peavey, it's just plastic, and this up here is like a cheap plastic, knobs plastic. The whole thing really is plastic. It's not.
Yeah. The weight is just that speaker casing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, but like I said in the last video though, so in case you didn't see the last video, I actually appreciate that they decided to go for less quality in the build, so that they could put more quality into the tone.
Yeah.
I don't know what their thought process was, but I'm sure it was like, hey, let's put a 12-inch speaker in this thing and make it sound really good. And if that means everything else has to be plastic and cheap, so be it, because at the end of the day, the tone is what counts.
Sure.
I'm thinking that's what their thought process was.
I mean, for something so digital, I mean, you can't really put like a metal casing around to be so programmable, I guess. And plus, that's what the weight, and that probably goes up in price too. If you
absolutely.
That hardware to it, but
it's kind of like the orange amps are always really high quality. But they get really expensive too.
And as basic as they are, I mean, it's just self-explanatory knobs and whatnot.
Right. So I mean, there is a lot on this. I mean, we're not going to have time to test every effect on this thing because there's a bunch. But let me just give you a quick run through of what this offers. So you've got instrument type. So first of all, you plug in here, and it's pretty amazing actually how many different options this thing has. So right away, as soon as you plug it in, you can choose instrument type: electric 1, electric 2, acoustic, or bass. So I haven't messed with everything on this because it would take forever. But it's really cool to me though that you can specify what kind of instrument you plugged in, and then it'll shape the tone accordingly. So if you plug an acoustic in, you hit the acoustic button. That's cool, right? Yeah. I mean, it automatically gives you the right tone for what you're doing.
That's something I didn't extrapolate on when I played through it. I was like, wow, you could put a bass through there or something.
Right, yeah. When you start really looking close at this, it's like it's crazy how much is on it. So then you've got after that instrument and stomp boxes. So I mean, there's just a whole array of different things you can choose from here. A bunch of stomp boxes to choose from. You get to the amplifiers. Like we said a minute ago, you've got a bunch of Peavey classic amps to choose from, and in my experience so far, they all sound really good. They really do. Here's a couple acoustic options. Here's a couple of bass options. So lots to choose from. You get to the effects. Now, you've got flanger, looks like compressor, envelope filter, chorus, tremolo, octaver, phaser, rotary speaker, reverse pitch shifter. So there's a lot to choose from. I mean, it definitely rivals the Roland Cube as far as the number of effects.
Right.
And this is the button too, where if you push this in, then the EQ knobs change to where you can mess with the effect settings, and then you push it again to take these back to EQ. It's a little complicated. May not sound complicated, but when you look at this thing and get your hands on it, it's like, look at all this crap everywhere. It's like you can hardly figure it out. But and then you've got your pre-gain, which is basically going to be like your gain level, distortion level. Post-gain is more of like it's kind of like a volume setting, really. And then finally you got master volume. There's a headphone jack, auxiliary in, there's a USB port. I assume this comes with some software. Honestly, I've not tested that. Tons and tons of features. On the back, we've got a remote switch. It looks like it's compatible with MIDI.
Switch,
yeah. And then just power. So the back, is pretty straightforward. So not much else to say about this thing. I think it's pretty obvious I like it, so that's not going to be a surprise at the end of the video. But one thing I will tell you though is I really haven't done much with clean tone on this. Like when I got it, it kind of became my metal amp.
Right. Yeah.
For portability.
As good as it was sounding, yeah, it was.
So I'm interested to see, what the clean tone is like. I believe it does have an acoustic simulator on it, so I'll be interested to see how that compares. I'm not expecting much. If you saw the last video, it's like acoustic simulators are usually garbage on any.
I haven't
amp.
found one that I've liked yet. So.
Oh, did you see? I don't know if you watched the last video though, but remember I was saying there was one thing that was convincing on Wes Borland's guitar, and I couldn't remember the name of it.
Oh, the pickup or whatever.
Right.
Oh,
so it ended up being the piezo pickups.
Oh, okay. Oh,
you heard of those?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, because I had to go back and look because it was driving me crazy. I can't remember what it was. On his Ibanez guitar. And I just remember watching a video on YouTube where he was demonstrating how it was like basically with the flick of a switch, it went to acoustic, and I was like, I couldn't believe it. It sounded just like an
That's
acoustic.
actually what I've seen a lot of people play upright basses and acoustic electrics. They'll put a piezo in right on the bridge, wood on wood contact. So yeah, I think that's the closest thing to acoustic guitars. So.
I really know nothing about them. Yeah. It'd be really cool. So if anyone from that company is watching, send us some. I'd love to try it out. Yeah, right. All right, cool. Well, enough chit chat. Let's get down to business here. Anything you'd like to add about this? Any first thoughts?
No, I just noticed. There's open back on it a little bit, but I mean, yeah, I'm ready to plug it in.
Rock out a little bit?
Yep.
All right, very cool. Well, let's test this thing out and see what we think. All right, guys. See you in a minute. All right, very good. We're back. And before we even start talking about it, I just want to make a couple of corrections for some things I said at the beginning of the video. I did a little bit of homework after we did our test. So I was saying that the Vypyr VIP 3 is basically the exact same thing, only I thought it had an LED screen. Actually, that's not true. The VIP 3 is a 100 watt amp. The one we're testing today is a 40 watt. I've never played the VIP 3, but that, I mean, I'd really be interested to hear what that 100 watt sounds like. It might be a huge difference. And then also I just wanted to mention, at least at the time of this video recording, there's a new Peavey Vypyr called the Pro 100. It's a 100 watt modeling amp. Costs a lot more than these other ones do. It's up at $600. But as impressive as this one we tested today was, I'd really like to try that out sometime too. So many amps, so little time, right? Anyway, I just want to make those clarifications. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and go first. I think it's really obvious that I like this amp. I mean, I've been clear about that going back probably 3 videos. So no surprises there. One thing I'd like to say that I keep meaning to mention in these videos, and I always forget, is if you're watching these videos to decide whether to buy an amp or not, obviously we're going to throw in some sound test for you so you can hear what it sounds like. But, you know, pay more attention to what we're actually saying about the amp than what you're hearing.
Right.
Because you got to understand, you put an SM57 up to an amp, it sounds good, but it doesn't sound like it does sitting in the room. And then after that, now you're streaming it from YouTube, which might take away some audio quality. Then you're listening to it through your computer speakers, which is, for all we know, is laptop speakers. So, I mean, you know, you can only tell so much through a YouTube video. That's why we talk so much, because we can really explain the amp much more than anything you'll hear. But the sound test is there for you, so if it's helpful, cool. So what I'll say about it is this is actually the first time I've really put that amp through the test. I've owned it for a long time, but, you know, I usually just turn it on and rock out. I haven't, really tested everything on it like that before.
So you approached it as a regular practice amp. You turn it on, put some gain or
exactly
whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I usually because I said at the beginning of the video I used it for teaching outside the home.
Right.
Well, it wasn't even a week after I bought the thing I decided not to teach outside the home, so I never even used it for the purpose I bought it for. So I basically would just plug in and rock out every now and then, and I just loved how it sounded, but I never really put it through the test. I think it's amazing. Like I was telling Sean right before we started filming again, of the practice amps I've played, which of course isn't all, but several, that Peavey Vypyr is right here at number 1, and the second best is way down here. Like, that's really how I feel about it. I think it is an amazing sounding amp. I can't believe that thing is $200 and sounds like that. It's just really, really cool. I know I mentioned some things at the beginning of the video that I thought were cons about it. One more con I can say now that I've tested it out more is that it really does feel to me like it's a heavy metal amp. Like, yeah, it has a ton of options, but I didn't really hear... I thought the clean tone was just fine, but I didn't think it was, like, beautiful. And, like, as far as blues tones, yeah, they're there, but they're just average. Where it really shined was every time you'd put on some high gain amp and just start rocking on it, it's like, wow, like awesome sounding. So that's where it really shines. So if you're into metal, yeah, you can't beat this thing for the price. I don't think you can.
Yeah, I think so too. The emphasis on just like the 6505, like gains, and really it's got a lot of headroom with distortions. And so yeah, like classic and blues, I think were... they're there, but an afterthought, or maybe some thicken it up with chorus or whatever. But just plugging in straight through, it's like plugging in straight through the head,
right?
You know.
Well, and it makes sense if you think about it.
Closest thing possible, anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it makes sense if you think about it. I mean, I'm no blues expert, but I haven't heard of too many blues guys telling me Peavey's where it's at.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Very rare, I agree.
Yeah.
But
when it comes to rock and metal, you hear it all the time. Like the 5150, the 6505, like all these different amps, the Triple X, which, by the way, the Triple X, I've never played the real deal Triple X. Have you?
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
Does it sound as awesome as
Yes,
it does?
absolutely does. I mean,
I want to try it.
I am so impressed with how similar the tones are compared to the amps. I didn't even know there was a Butcher amp setting on it.
Yeah.
And we stumbled across that one, and that's like pure, JCM.
Right.
Hot tubes, just plug it in, like, classic rock. Just I'm very impressed with that.
Yeah. We tried all kinds of things. You saw me play a little acoustic. I'm not much of a slide player, that's for sure. But I do what I can. And I'm certainly no bass player. But it has a bass option, so I plugged one in and slapped a few notes and made a fool of myself. But at least you got to hear it. But I'm really impressed that I thought the bass tone through it is fine. It sounds good, and I thought the acoustic tone was nice and full and sounded good. And I could go on about it for a long time, but just to sum it up, really, obviously, I'm a huge fan. Can't recommend it enough. If you got a couple $100 to blow and you're looking for a practice amp, I personally have never played one that came close to it.
Yeah. To me, I said to Mark, what did I say? Utilitarian amp, I think, is this is an amp I would put in my living room and just go grab any instrument and plug in. I've never actually played official, amps for guitar, bass, etc.
Acoustic, yeah.
And that's something I would want in my living room, just rather than changing out little practice amps to cater to each guitar.
Yeah, I can do all three.
Yeah, I love that feature, and just dialing in however you want. Works for me.
Yeah,
it's just one amp to bind them.
Yeah, one amp to rule them all.
Yeah. It's really cool.
I agree 100%.
And the effects, we kind of dabbled in some of the effects, and once you pinpoint what each feature knob does, depth and rate with each effect, probably not the best rotary speaker money could buy. It's not like a Leslie, but it's there. It's comparable. I mean,
how would you? Okay, so let me ask you this: how would you compare? Not tone now, but just the effects of the Roland Cube versus this.
Oh, underwhelming with Roland's effects. I mean,
so you thought this beat the Roland for the effects?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, and then plus you have like flanger, tremolos. They just sounded a little bit more realistic. I think.
Right.
I mean, Roland has great effects as far as like synth wise and everything, but not on the Cube. I don't think it would hold up to.
We're not going to get an endorsement from Roland anytime soon. I mean, I like the Cube.
Yeah.
But I don't. I just think for the money, this Peavey blows it away. Blows it away. So I said at the beginning that this had a acoustic simulator. I'm going to walk that back a little bit because actually after I started looking at the controls, which are, like we mentioned, pretty complex, I really don't think that is meant to be an acoustic simulator. It's more just a setting for when you have an acoustic plugged in. However, through the electric, it still sounded really good. It was a really cool, clean tone setting. But I don't think that's actually an acoustic simulator. I don't think there's actually supposed to be one on there. Right. But the only other thing I was going to add was that for the Roland and for many other practice amps that model a lot of different amps and channels and tones, most of them, well, I'll give you an example. So going back to the Roland Cube again, it had clean, it had distortion, it had stack, it had metal stack.
Right.
And one thing we were saying about it, I mean, we thought it sounded okay. But the problem was, it seemed to me like every time you went from dirtier and dirtier and dirtier down that
on and off,
it sounded like the same amp to me, only with more gain. This actually sounds like different amps when you change. Like the difference between the 6534
and the
6505 and the Triple X, it sounded like three different amps. Like it didn't sound like just variations on the same theme like a lot of these amps are. So it's like a true modeler to me. But anyway, take it away, Sean. So
I don't know what to say. I'm so impressed. Like even more like as we delve deeper into it, I just I like that. And just for the fact that, a 40 watt amp, 12-inch can make a world of difference. It just so much headroom with each amp. As Mark said, just there's like so many different amps in that little box.
Right.
I was amazed.
And we didn't even I kind of feel like we didn't even scratch the surface.
No.
After all that testing, there's still like a lot left. Well, you got like this whole dial of amp emulators, and each one with 3 channels. I mean, the possibilities are mind-boggling.
Like
It'd take
you said,
hours to go
plugging an
through.
electric guitar in to get like some, like just an acoustic, not a simulator, but it had those characteristics after you struck a note. You know, you like for like an intro or something. If you didn't have an acoustic or you didn't have a bass, you could still get that full sound and get those characteristics. So that's one of the things that, I mean, I could hear it. I was just listening as Marc was playing, or I was just listening to the amp itself, and gosh, what tremendous tone. Like the Butcher just sounded so juicy and classic rock, and from metal, I don't know, it's what I prefer.
Well, a lot of these practice amps say something like stack.
Right.
Like the Roland said metal stack, but I don't want to pick on Roland too much because it's, but, but I've played a lot of amps
Any
of different.
extreme button
say
or
stack.
Right.
Or like half stack.
Yep.
And it's like, every time I play those, I'm like, But that Butcher, now that sounded like what a stack is supposed to sound like. Like when I hear that word, that's what I think. Like this huge, juicy rock and roll sound. And that's kind of why I played a little AC/DC, because I just like, as soon as you hear that huge sound,
you can't help yourself to play a big full open chord and just whoa. And once again, I say emulated, not necessarily a tube tone, but like so close to being from digital technology or whatever. However they do it, well done. I gotta salute them.
No, I think so
Peavey
too.
for that, because that's very close to having a tube amp in your house. That would drive mothers crazy. So
this is good. So another thing I'll say about the tone, and it's going to drive me crazy because this is something I've tried to describe for probably 15 years, but there's no word for it that I'm aware of, so I'm never successful at describing it. But I'll just put it this way, especially when you're playing a high gain amp and you're playing something metal, like with some palm muting and things like that. There's this sound that comes from that heavy, distorted palm muting kind of style that you get in a tube amp that you don't get in a solid state amp. And like, as silly as it is, I can't think of any way to describe it other than that juicy sound.
Yeah.
Just this big, thick, juicy, yet clean, beautiful, overdriven sound. And this, to my knowledge, is the first solid state amp I had ever played that started to capture that tube screaming sound that usually you can only get from a tube amp turned way up. So yeah, like I'm a really big thumbs up to Peavey. Like I just love this amp, as if it weren't obvious enough. I'm really a big fan. So.
And in my experience, comparing it to some amps that I've had, like modeling features on them, like some 60-watt solid states and whatnot, can't compare it to this, because I mean, it had, like you said, like it had a lot of those blackface or tweed or stack features, and it's like, okay, that's close, and I know what it's trying to sound like, but this was like dead on. I mean, to have those full 100-watt amps or whatever at your,
right
touch of a button, it's like, wow.
I mean, I guess the only thing that would be missing between the real deal and this is, I'm sure the real deal does sound better and certainly louder. I mean, this is still, at the end of the day, it's still a practice amp 112.
Right.
You're not going to go on stage with this thing and rock it out.
Exactly.
But man, for just being at home practicing, wow, like it's pretty much perfect.
You're not sacrificing anything. You're not, this is 10, 15 watts, and don't turn the gain all the way up, et cetera, et cetera. But, I mean,
so one more question for you. So at the beginning of the video, I talked about one of my complaints was that adjusting all these different effects I thought was laid out in a somewhat confusing way. What's your take on that? You got to figure it out and mess with it some. What'd you think?
I guess, I mean, if you kind of know how each effect is, like a flange or something, there's depth, or let's say that's a bad example, maybe like a tremolo or something, there's depth, there's speed, there's rate or whatever,
right?
Then you can kind of find it, by your ear, and then we didn't go through a manual or anything,
right?
And I think there's a little bit of a learning curve with it, with all the lights and etc. There's like double, triple clutching going on, so it could take someone, if you're not really wanting to do all that, it could take you a while to figure it all out. But
I mean, within 20 minutes, and especially if you have help from the manual, it'd be even like maybe 10.
Right.
You'd have a really good idea of how to operate the whole thing. It really, I make too big of a deal of it. It's really not a problem at all. I mean, if you give it any time at all, you'll figure out how it works. I do think it could have been laid out maybe in a more simple way. But I mean, when you think about how many options are on this thing, maybe that is the easiest way they could come up with.
Right. Yeah.
Because you got a full AQ, you got gain settings, you've got a variety of amps to choose from. Each amp has several channels to choose from. You have different instruments you can put into it. You have different stomp boxes. I mean, it's insane how much is on this thing. So I guess with that said, they did a pretty good job of finding a way to make all of this customizable without it having 30 knobs on it. But
and if you're colorblind, you can even still go on the shades. I mean, if it goes red to orange to green, if it still has like the contrast. You can still guide yourself around. I'm thinking of the colorblind out there.
Oh yeah, no.
But
no,
I mean, really, with all the lights, it is kind of daunting. You're like, oh, okay, this does this, but that's just kind of a learning curve.
No, I understand what you're saying.
Playing around with it, I mean, it's just something. I mean,
there
like
are
I
lights
said,
everywhere on that thing. Everywhere. It looks like a Christmas tree.
Yeah, you're like,
it's just
as soon as you play, you're like watching the amp and you're not paying attention. But
right.
I mean, once it's in your living room or right next to you, it's your go-to amp. You'll figure it out. It's worth it.
Yeah, no, I think, that's kind of the main point I was getting to as well, which is just that even though there is definitely a learning curve to figure out how it all works, it's so worth it.
Yeah.
It's so worth it. Okay, so let's go and wrap this up. So let's go ahead and let me get your take on the 1 to 10 rating and just if there's anything else you'd like to add as far as why, go for it.
I could go on and on, but it's just rambling. I'm just so impressed with it. I kind of have a loss for words about it. I just wanted to play through it.
It's going to be like an hour and a half video of us just going on and on about how cool this thing is. So.
I'd have to give it a 9. I mean, was it 40 watts? And it sounds like so much more than that. Like Mark said, it's probably the best practice amp. I definitely want one for my own use. So I'll give it a 9. If there's better out there, I'd love to play it. Like Mark said,
what would make it
watts, a 10? Yeah, what would make it a 10? If it was a little bit more aesthetically appealing. I mean, if it had a little bit more like the grill and the faceplate and stuff was a little bit beefier for my taste.
It's cheaply
doesn't
made
have to look like
quality-wise.
Castle Grayskull or anything, but I mean, but it could have just something a little bit more pizzazz.
No, I understand. Hey, it's like I said at the beginning of the video. The thing's mostly plastic.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not anything fancy with
even
the build
if it's like
construction.
chrome plated paint or something to look like. I don't know, but I mean it's
not much to look at.
No, but it sounds great. I'm impressed. So 9 for me overall.
Right on. Well, I'm gonna go with a 9.5. It is very, very close to perfection when compared to other amps of the same price, of which I've never played one that matches it. What would make it a 10 for me would be it's limited in what it can do genre-wise. There's not a lot of blues to be had out of it. The clean tones are fine, but they're not great. But if you're a rock metal guy and that's what you're looking for, it's a 10. But I can't give it in good conscience a 10 because it's not completely versatile. I don't care as much about the way it looks as Sean does. I don't think as far as the build quality. Of course it'd be nice if it was like really nice build quality and everything. But I mean, you get over that in 5 minutes. To me, it's all about the tone, and the tone's pretty amazing. And I think if it was built better, it would be pushing $250, $300 bucks.
That's what I thought too. If it,
I kind of like how they were like, let's make this thing $200 so it's affordable to pretty much anyone, yet sound really good.
And if you're a straight PV guy person, it emulates each PV amp like as close as possible to the real thing. So I mean, if you're looking to like purchase and you don't want to throw down that money on a big 100-watt head yet, that'd be the thing to practice or to test out first, I think.
Absolutely.
To like get those sounds first.
Yeah, I agree. All right, very good. So thumbs up, absolutely. Good job to Peavey, and thanks for joining us. As always, we really appreciate it, guys. If you have any questions or anything, please leave them in the comments. Check out my website. It's www.soundtheorystudio.com. Please give us a like and a subscribe. It means a lot to us just to know that people are appreciating the videos. We enjoy doing it. We hope it helps you make good decisions when you buy your amps. That's why we make such long videos. We want to really talk about it, and like this is everything we can tell you about the amp basically and what we thought about it. So very good. So thanks very much for your support. Always appreciated. And we'll see you in a couple weeks. And so Sticks and Strings has a couple of really cool things they want us to look at. I'm excited about. I won't give away the secret yet. And yeah, so cool, guys. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Take care.